Okay, this is a bit of a how-to guide for beating Gorecrusher in V Rising. I realise there's a bunch of guides already out there on the endgame bosses, some of which are extremely good, but when it comes to Gorecrusher, every guide I've seen is for normal mode, where for the end phase, they all pretty much say, okay, and now just DPS him down quickly before you die. That's great for normal mode, but if you've played hard mode, you'll know this just won't work. The extra hit points and defenses he has means he can soak a ton of extra hits comparatively, which means we can't just blitz through his last phase, but instead have to find a way of surviving it for a decent amount of time. This in turn means we need a different setup to what all the other guides out there have, which cascades into having to do the rest of the fight quite differently. If you're playing normal mode, this guide will still work for you, but yeah, it'll probably mean you're a bit over-prepared for the fight. It may be easier for you to just watch one of the normal mode guides. This one is going to be specifically targeted for those wanting to solo Gorecrusher on hard. Okay, so before we even start, let's talk consumables. Our damage this fight is going to come mostly from spells. We need to be doing as much as we can, so we're going to need a steady supply of snow flowers and fish for potions. And we're also going to need some 100% scholar blood, as it ups our spell damage the most, as well as giving a spell leech, which will be super nice as we don't really have the time to go popping healing pots during the fight. First up, the snow flowers. So there's no spot on the map where there's a large enough collection to quickly farm, or even a spot where you're able to send out some minions on a mission for them. So the only real choice is to grow your own in a garden, which requires seeds, and for this we have two choices. The first involves the abandoned farm. If you go here, you'll see a bunch of scarecrows in the field. You can actually find these scarecrows in various places around the map, depending on where people have built their bases. There's a spot just over the road from here, for example, where they can also spawn if no one's built there. But at the abandoned farm, you're always guaranteed to find at least a couple. If you hit a scarecrow, while most of the time they turn into just some wooden planks or the like, sometimes they'll turn into this hidden little mini-boss. I'm not sure of the exact frequency of this. From my experience, I'd say it's more often than 1 in 10, but less often than 1 in 5 that hitting one turns into a fight. He's quite low level, so easy enough to pummel. I don't think he has any particularly tricky moves, and when you defeat him, from my experience, he has around a 1 in 3 chance to drop a bunch of snowflower seeds. Alternatively, if you don't want to put in the farming time, the merchant, Gavin the Shady Dealer, has an infinite number of seeds you can buy for silver coins that are pretty cheap. Either way you choose, you should be able to get a snowflower garden happening in your base pretty quickly. For fish, swamp dwellers are clearly best as they make witch's brews, and while technically the best place to get these is fishing up in the cursed forest, I personally prefer Brighthaven docks. An entire night clearing out the boxes and fishing spots at the docks will net around 1 swamp dweller on average, but you also get a huge amount of endgame loot, including having a chance to fish up one of these little guys, which I haven't seen any mention of anywhere else, not even in the wiki. He is rare and you definitely won't see him too often, but as you can see, each one is worth a huge amount of loot. Combined with all the other supplies from the docks, I find it far preferable for swamp dweller collecting, but then again, I did run out and end up having to use enchanted brews instead of witch's brews, so yeah, the choice is yours. If you don't care about other loot, just swamp dwellers, or you feel you absolutely must have witch's brews for Gorecrusher, fishing in the cursed forest is still the most efficient way to get them. Next up, 100% scholar blood. So the easiest way to get this is Mosswick and Dawnbreak villages. Just fly in bat form once a night and land up the back here. Here in Mosswick there's a couple of token guards, maybe 3 nuns, which are pretty easy, and around a half dozen of these white robed scholars which don't even fight back. Kill the token guards and check the nuns and the white robed ones out. If there's no 100%ers, just kill everyone and come back again tomorrow night. Do this in both villages and just rinse repeat. It may take a few nights game time, but it's still the fastest way I've found by far to get a scholar 100%er that you can take back to your prison, and you only need one to be sorted on the blood front for the rest of the game. Now we've got consumables sorted, we're about ready to jump into the details of the fight mechanics, but before that I just wanted to quickly mention that as of right now, and it's currently July 2022 when I'm saying this, Gorecrusher is a little bugged. It's possible that during the fight he'll just lose you as a target and completely reset, as seen here, meaning he gets all his health back and you have to start the fight all over again. I would say this happens with about the same frequency as the Scarecrow bosses, so more than 1 in 10 attempts, but less than 1 in 5. It can be super frustrating, especially if you're on a good run and nearly got him down, but there's nothing you can do about it except to chalk the attempt up to experience and start again. I'm sure they'll fix it in future patches, but if they haven't by the time you're trying him, then yeah, be prepared for just a little extra added frustration. Okay, time to get into the main part of the guide, quaff our consumables and jump on in. Gorecrusher begins having very few moves. He can do a very small dash and try to throw you over his shoulder with his horns. This is the easiest move to dodge, simply walk away. As we're using slashes, we can even dash in with an elusive strike every now and then, like so, to try and trigger him doing it, allowing us to position ourselves nicely and maybe even send a spell his way. Next up, he can hit the ground with an area attack, which then sends out shockwaves. Again, for this, just walk away, and don't stand in the path of a shockwave. If you find yourself in the clear quickly enough, there's also time to get a spell in on him here as well. Lastly, he can turn blue and do that triple attack thing you just saw, trying to thwack you on the head to cause a stun. The last of these hits has a bit more range than it looks like it's going to, so do be careful, but again, the solution is to just walk away. And if you find yourself in the clear quickly enough, again, we can sneak a quick spell into him. Okay, done enough damage to trigger a new skill. Here it is, his jump attack. No walking away from this one. This is the attack that we try to save our movement skill for. As Gorecrusher's health gets lower and lower, he unlocks more and more new moves. When he gets a new move, he'll use it on you straight away, followed by it then being included in his moveset to pick from at will in the future. His last move is an exception to this, as he only uses it once, but we'll get to that later. Just quickly, you may have noticed already that I'm using slashes, whereas every other guide uses the Reaper. Now don't get me wrong, the Reaper is great for damage, but as I mentioned earlier, for hard mode, this fight isn't a damage race, but an endurance test. And when it comes to getting out of a tight situation, nothing beats the Slash's Camouflage move. We haven't needed it yet, but we will. In theory, we could be using a Reaper now and switch later, but there's enough to keep track of in this fight without also worrying about swapping weapons for different phases. So yeah, I find it easier to just start with the weapon we'll eventually need and use it the entire time. New move number 2 happening there. Gorecrusher pulls back a little to telegraph what's about to happen before charging quite a long distance, and he always does this 3 times in a row. He aims his charge at where your character will be if continuing on his current path, so the easy way to avoid this is to walk in one direction, and just before he charges, walk in the opposite direction. There is enough time during these charges to sneak in some spells, but it requires cutting it pretty fine on the timing. So generally, I'd suggest playing it safe and waiting till after you've finished dodging his 3rd charge before letting loose with a spell. Here he goes again. So we're going this way. No, we're not. Am I walking this way? I changed my mind. Alternatively, we could use our Slash's Camouflage, which means he won't be able to target us temporarily, so he'll stop his 3 charges completely and just wait to start an entirely new move when we become visible again. We obviously don't need to do that yet, but later in the fight, when things start getting really hectic and we can't keep an eye on exactly what Gorecrusher is up to 100% of the time, having that option available to us becomes invaluable. Okay, already time for his next new move. Only a few left now. So if you recall earlier when talking consumables, I mentioned we want as much spell damage as possible. You might have wondered why, if this is an endurance fight. Well, here's the answer. With this move, Gorecrusher jumps to the far end of the arena, goes invulnerable, and summons a wolf and a bear. He stays out of action for a set amount of time, and in that time, we really want to kill them both. When Gorecrusher comes out of his invulnerability, he'll close on us at high speed and attempt to thwack. And yeah, things can get messy extremely fast if we haven't cleared up his summons by that time. Individually, they're nothing to worry about, but this is part of how Gorecrusher tries to get you by the end. He has attacks coming at you from so many different angles that we can't focus on everything at once and eventually just get overwhelmed. We don't want that to happen, so yeah, killing those 2 quickly is important. So while I was talking then, we copped our first hit, but as you can see, this is where that spell leech we have comes into play. It's a long fight and mistakes are bound to happen every now and then, but with the Scholar Blood's leech effect, as long as it's only the 1 hit, we can get back most of the life we lose pretty quickly. You should really be aiming to stay almost full life the entire fight, but if things do start going south, remember there's always the ultimate move to fall back on. With Scholar Blood, it gives us a ton of life back, as well as giving us a bit of extra time for our cooldowns to reset. But of course we can't use it often, so I do suggest saving it for emergencies only. Okay, second to last move to introduce here. He slows your movement speed down for a brief period and releases a bunch of orbs that float around aimlessly for a while before dissipating. He can be hit while doing this, and this move on its own isn't actually dangerous, unless you walk into an orb of course, in which case there goes half your health. But in combination with his other attacks, the slow from this one can be deadly. Just another reason we need to kill the bear and wolf summons when we get the chance. If our movement speed suffers while they're still around, they'd potentially be able to get a bunch of free attacks on us. One more thing I need to cover with this move is how to get away from him at the end. When he comes out of his invulnerability and starts closing on us like so, we need to use our movement skill to get away, and we need to use it early as well. It's possible that he then goes to another move, in which case, great, all sorted, but it's also possible that he smashes our illusionary double and continues closing on us. If this happens, we need to recast our dash, followed by using our camouflage. The second dash alone is surprisingly not enough here, as his second attack targets us as a preference. If we dash and then go invisible though, he'll then fall for our illusionary double, waste his attack, and that's the end of it. Okay, time for his final move, which Gorecrusher only ever casts once. He summons a spirit copy of himself that joins in on the fight. The Spirit shares all the close range, non-AoE melee attacks of Gorecrusher, as well as his triple charge, so he can't do things like summoning floating orbs or jump attacks, but he will still hit you for a ton if you get too close. His health bar is a little misleading, as he can only soak around as much damage as maybe the bear summon can, and if you take it down to 0, he slumps on the ground for a while, like you can see there, before getting back up with around half health. This is where this guide really differs from all the normal mode guides. At this point, they all suggest focusing on the main guy and ignoring the Spirit. Not us though. If we're casting a spell and have the choice of which to hit, we're going to be targeting the Spirit copy as a preference. We're still a long way from the end of the fight in the scheme of things, and finding a window to safely cast in is a lot trickier with 2 attackers on the screen. The extra opportunities for attack that we get just dealing with the one Gorecrusher roughly cancels out the ones we spend on the Spirit, but it's the dealing with less incoming attacks which is really key here. If we're getting attacked by Gorecrusher, his Spirit, maybe a bear and a wolf, dodging floating orbs, etc, it becomes nearly impossible to keep track of everything going on, and even if we could, it's not guaranteed there'd be enough time to actually stop and cast a spell. We'd inevitably get just overwhelmed in the end. We really don't want to let things get to that stage, and the best way to ensure we don't is to keep on top of Gorecrusher's adds whenever we can and for as long as we can. So just then, if you go back and pause the video, you'll see another glitch that can happen sometimes. Gorecrusher's Spirit did his telegraph of "I'm about to do a triple charge," but then got stuck on the spot. A few moments later, I pretended like that wasn't what had happened and teleported him straight into me. Nothing you can do when the fight glitches on you, you just have to soak it. I did cop 2 hits in close succession not long before though, and I get hit again by the wolf just there, so my maximum hit points has really taken a beating. Not wanting to risk another glitch just finishing me off, I decided this qualifies as the kind of emergency I was talking about and popped my special. Just going to have to make do with around 200 being my maximum health now instead of 450ish, which means completely losing the buffer zone, so any more hits back to back and my guy is dead. Conveniently, the fight doesn't have too long left in it now though. If that had happened near the beginning, I probably would have just started over. Okay, so just a couple of things left to cover while my guy finishes off this fight. First up, you've probably noticed how I've been using Camouflage, but just in case you haven't, one of the biggest uses for it after stopping the triple charge attack in its tracks is to go invisible and then just walk as far away from the Gorecrusher Spirit as possible. As he only has one move that can close distances quickly, this quite often gives us enough time to get a spell off once we become visible again, depending on the real Gorecrusher's choice of move of course. Next, there's one last thing I should cover about Gorecrusher's invulnerable summoning move. Technically, he summons a wolf and a bear for every ally of yours in the fight. This can be important for spell choices, the mosquito spell being a good example of this, as if you time it poorly, it can count as an extra ally in the fight, and you'll find Gorecrusher summoning 2 bears and 2 wolves. I've just gone for the spells with the most raw damage, and while you're obviously free to choose whatever you're most comfortable with for this fight, if you find Gorecrusher summoning more than a single wolf and bear at a time, it's almost certainly not a glitch, but a result of your spell choices. So, here we are at the end of the fight. I was actually surprised that last spell didn't finish Gorecrusher off, but as he's now only 1 shot off dead, instead of working on the summons, I figured I'd just circle around and pop him when he stopped being invulnerable. You should only do this at the very end of the fight though, as yeah, if it doesn't work and you fail to finish him off, you're going to be in trouble very soon afterwards. And that's everything. Hopefully this vid has been at least somewhat useful for those planning on fighting Gorecrusher themselves. If you've got any questions, do feel free to leave them below and I promise to answer them all eventually. And yeah, other than that, good luck with your own fights, and maybe I'll see you around the V Rising neighborhood sometime. See ya.